Chris, this is a one-to-many attack relationship in here. And that's probably the scariest part about adversaries like this is they recognize and realize the benefit of going after an aggregate target as opposed to one by ones. And that's likely going to create a much wider victim spread.
Welcome to the Cybersecurity Defenders Podcast Weekly Intel Chat. My name's Christopher Luft. I'm one of the co-founders of LimaCharlie, and I will be your host. Joining me today to break down the cybersecurity news being shared by the awesome InfoSec community is the one and only Matt Bromley. And don't forget, this podcast is brought to you by LimaCharlie, maker of the SecOps Cloud platform, infrastructure for security operations. Think of it as a backend for your MSSP, where everything is built API first. Scale with ease and confidence as your business grows. You can start today for free at limacharlie.io. Now let's get into it. How you doing today, Matt Bromley?
Hey, Chris, I'm doing well. How are you today, sir?
Pretty good. Just fresh coming back from Toronto Sector, which is like
Awesome.
Black Hat of the North. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Nice to hang out with my fellow Canadian security folks.
Very cool, man. Good to hear. I haven't been to Sector. I know I think it's a part of Black Hat or a part of those events or whatnot. And I do go to Black Hat in Vegas every single year. And I've been to Black Hat EU before as well, but have not made my way to Sector before. So I would like to. Yeah,
it was really cool. And the keynotes were great. H.C. Moore gave a really good talk on sort of modern security practices that I think to me and you seem like a little bit, well known, but presented to that audience, I think I saw a lot of eyes opening and mouths dropping and stuff like that. So
I'll be honest with you, there's a lot of situations where even some of the basic security advice is much needed. So I'm glad to hear that you got a voice like HD Moore delivering that information too. That's huge.
Yeah, it was super cool. Anyway, we got some exciting things to get through today, so let's just get to it. A newly disclosed vulnerability in Redis dubbed RediShell and tracked as CVE-2025-49844 affects all Redis versions and carries a maximum CVSS score of 10.0. The flaw, which has existed in the code base for over 13 years, yes, folks, 13 years, allows remote code execution via a use after free or UAF memory corruption issue when executing Lua scripts. A default feature in Redis, according to Wiz Research, a post-authenticated attacker can send a specially crafted Lua payload that escapes the Lua sandbox, enabling arbitrary native code execution on the host. This essentially grants full control over the server running Redis, including the ability to exfiltrate data, encrypt or delete content, hijack computing resources, or facilitate lateral movement across a cloud environment. The vulnerability was first demonstrated by Wiz at the Pwn to Own 2025 security conference in Berlin and reported to Redis maintainers on May 16th. A patch release was made available on October 3rd, accompanied by a security advisory. Redis, an in-memory data store used by an estimated 75% of cloud environments, is particularly vulnerable due to typical deployment patterns. Over 300,000 Redis instances are exposed to the internet today, 60,000 of which have no authentication at all. Yes, folks, you heard that correctly. No authentication at all. Even within internal environments, lack of auth enforcement still puts Redis nodes at risk from attackers who have already breached cloud perimeters. So yeah, this one seemed like we should probably bring it up on the show.
Yeah, this one's important to bring up, Chris. There's two sides to this one for me. I brought up the article here. First off, hat tip to the Wiz team for what they did and what they found and presented and whatnot. The first thing that we'll talk about is, yes, definitely a wide-reaching or very, very important vulnerability to be aware of. CVSS score of 10, which is huge. We've talked about this in this podcast before. Second is just kind of the widespread, unfortunate deployment of insecure instances. As you brought up, about 60,000 instances have no authentication configured. Unfortunately, the official Redis container does not require authentication. And Chris, this takes me back almost, maybe 12 years ago when I was doing some analysis I was working with a team of folks over in the EU. We were identifying some open NoSQL databases, Mongo, CouchDB, Elastic, and things like that. This is when a lot of those databases started getting a lot of public-facing traction. And unfortunately, you would download them. They would have no configuration for security in place whatsoever. You would just run it. People would just throw it on the internet, open it up to 0.0.0.0. And next thing you know, you've got the ability to just log in and manually, review data and whatnot. This one provides a really interesting, unique insight here. We can see that the Wiz team actually initially disclosed this in May of 2025. It was sent to Redis back in May. Redis published the bulletin in October 3rd. So they had a good almost 4 months, I guess, to look around, and there is an upgraded patch available. I'd like to address one other thing, Chris, which is Wiz's publication article here, which I find to be a little bit, the word I'm looking for here, a little bit fear generating, maybe unnecessarily fear generating.
Got to sell that security, don't you?
I mean, so let me just point this out, security researchers, those of you who read this thing, given that Redis is used in 75% of cloud environments, the potential impact is extensive. Very, very, very true. Organizations are strongly urged to patch. Very, very, very true. This thing has been given a CVSS score of 10, a rating rarely seen, with only about 300 vulnerabilities receiving it in the past year. 300 out of 365 is not that rare. I just want to bring up and just say, like, let's be clear.
According to the laws of statistics.
Yeah, according to the laws of, I guess according to the laws of CVE statistics, which would have been a better way to phrase this, right? For me, the big focus on this here, and it's interesting, they're kind of calling this the Redis risk multiplier and whatnot. I think what is important to take away is just how widespread this technology is in use, number one. And then number two, as you already mentioned, and as I mentioned in the article, how widespread it is deployed with no security configured or no authentication configured. To be clear, it's less than 20% of instances. Like I want to make sure we offer a little bit of fair footing and a good foundation here, where if you're an organization that has authentication enabled and you keep your Redis patched and up to date and whatnot, you likely don't have anything to worry about. I would still double check, but you likely don't have anything to worry about. Less than 20% of instances are unauthenticated and exposed to the internet, which heightens the risk and the potential impact that they can be exploited. Chris, I think what really needs to be given a magnifying glass here, and this is what should tie into this, is the combination, and Wiz gets very close to this in their article, but I wish they would call it out a little bit more. The combination of no authentication and exposure is highly dangerous, allowing anyone to query. Everyone, you need to go one step further, which is an organization that is deploying Redis in this manner is likely also not paying attention. And I don't mean to throw shade towards anyone, but if you are deploying something that is mission or production critical, you're not authenticating, you're kind of just downloading the default container and just going with it, you're likely also not paying attention, which only heightens this. And we can't go above a CVSS score of 10, but maybe we need to create a Cybersecurity Defenders podcast rating of how much are folks actually going to notice whether or not this thing has actually happened, right? The Kev plus, if you will. And in this situation, I'm afraid to say it's probably going to get into a situation where a lot of organizations don't know. They're just unaware. They're just not paying attention. Just deployed, go, let's run, see what happens. I'm going to say of the 60,000 that are unauthenticated and are exposed to the internet, I'm going to say conservatively, maybe 2,000 to 3,000 probably have mission critical sensitive production data flowing through them. And, folks just aren't paying attention. That's the statistic that needs to change right there. So hat tip to Wiz. Appreciate you finding. Redis, thanks for the near 4-month disclosure to work through this. Patches are available. So patch. Chris, you're probably going to talk about this further, but just want to bring everyone up to speed with like the real risk here is there is a considerable population of folks who likely are not paying attention to what's going on. And that's the population we need to hit and make sure that they know this is out there and, can unfortunately be weaponized and maybe even used against them.
Yeah, and the 60,000 exposed to the internet with no authentication kind of reminds me of back when I was still sort of earning my stripes, having a Dreamhome host instance with like a weekend project with a NoSQL or a SQL database on there with default passwords. So probably not a lot of mission critical stuff to worry about, and a lot of people that just don't clean up after themselves very well.
Could not agree with you more.
All right. So the attack process is relatively straightforward. The attacker sends a malicious Lua script exploiting the UAF vulnerability. That script escapes the sandbox and executes native code on the Redis host. From there, the attacker can establish a reverse shell maintaining persistent access. With this foothold, they can ideally steal SSH keys, auth token certificates, deploy malware, e.g. crypto miners, Matt's favorite, or harvest Redis database content and sensitive host data. If credentials are obtained, the attacker can pivot laterally, gain elevated privileges, and target additional cloud resources. In containerized environments, which account for 57% of Redis deployments, the lack of hardening further amplifies risk. Wiz recommends immediate patching across all Redis environments, especially for internet-exposed and unauthenticated instances. For mitigation, organizations should enforce authentication using required paths, use network-level controls like firewalls and VPC segmentation, and disable Lua for untrusted users. Additional steps include endpoint monitoring, continuous asset discovery for outdated Redis instances, and validating exploitability and controlled simulations. Tuskira's CEO also emphasized the need for Redis itself to adopt safer defaults, including reduced default exposure and stricter sandboxing for Lua. Redis maintainers echoed this with guidance, restrict access to trusted users, limit Lua permissions, and enforce least privilege principles for identity management. I love how the advice for unauthenticated instances wasn't to put authentication on them.
No, of course not. No. You just need to up your security practices. I think it's covered in there a little bit. I think what the CEO over at Tuskira, your kind of last little statement there, I think is the right one, which is look for kind of a security integration, safer defaults. I think is a better way to frame it, where the default container requires authentication. I mean, to be honest, we're talking over 10 years ago now, Chris, but CouchDB. If you're familiar with CouchDB,
I do know
CouchDB. When you used to spin it up, it used to have what was called the admin party, which was its admin console, and by default, it was available and accessible to everyone without credentials. I remember actually meeting with that team many years ago, and they ended up making it not a default and requiring authentication in order to get in there. So in situations like this, I mean, I think you're dealing with a little bit of like a goal for frictionless deployment, which is probably what Redis is going for, of like, hey, it's so easy to deploy our thing. No one has to do a thing. And it's like, you should make them do a thing, because in a situation like this, having that little extra layer in place is more important than, we were frictionless 10 years ago.
Yeah. And I get the urge to have your deployment be like that early on when you're trying to get your first users and gain some market share. But Redis is, a default
Redis, you're
internet
past
component
now.
Yeah.
You got your big boy, big girl pants on now. Let's go. Come on.
There you go.
Let's get some authentication built in. Let's get some security integrated here and stop pretending like this is the way to do it. There's like, it's okay to cool and fly by the sun like this. It's like, guys, you're widely used. You're 330,000 instances deployed globally or something, whatever the final total number is. Get secure authentication in there. I mean, Chris, you and I sit here every single week and we talk about things like Python packages and NPMs, and we're kind of like in this low-level wild west of folks writing malicious code and committing packages and then using SEO poisoning to try to get folks to download them. I mean, that's old stuff, right? Redis, that's newer stuff. Redis, you've been around long enough to know better.
Yeah. And this next one is a critical one, but a little bit outdated now because we missed last week. I was out of town. We couldn't get our schedule together, but still worth talking about. Cisco has disclosed a critical zero-day vulnerability tracked as CVE-2025-49844, affecting its widely deployed iOS and iOS XE software, confirming active exploitation in the wild. The flaw resides in the Simple Network Management Protocol, or SNMP, subsystem, and can allow an attacker to execute remote code or trigger a denial of service, DOS condition, depending on the attacker's privilege level. Cisco's Product Security Incident Response Team, PSIRT, identified the issue during the investigation of attack support case and published the advisory on September 24, 2025. Technically, the vulnerability is caused by a stack overflow triggered when a malicious SNMP packet is sent to an affected device over either IPv4 or IPv6. All three SNMP versions, version 1, B2C, and B3, are impacted. Low-privileged authentication users, such as those with read-only SNMPv2C strings or SNMPv3 user credentials, can exploit the bug to cause a reload, effectively leading to a DOS. High-privileged users, however, it can escalate this to remote code execution as root on iOS XE systems. Yeah, that was a mouthful. Hopefully that made sense to somebody.
I just want to be clear and let folks know, because actually I've had to answer this question in the past 8 days, and I find it interesting that I had to. You can guess what day I was asked the question when I said 8 days. iOS is actually Cisco's native default built-in operating system as well. This is not Apple iOS. And I had someone actually freak out and was like, really? iOS? Like Apple iOS? And I was like, no. This is a Cisco thing. Long story short, Chris, I'm with you on this one, like bringing the awareness to play here. This one does make the Kev list. I believe it actually was updated recently. Cisco's Kev was updated recently to include this, and it is actively being exploited right now. So long story short, we don't have to go too much into the protocols and everything here. Let's just mention that if you do have these types of devices, and we're looking again at Cisco Catalyst 9300 series, Meraki MS390s, and then Cisco iOS and iOS XE software, you've got a vulnerability to go deal with. Please try and get those patched as quick as you can. Usually when Chris and I are on this show and we're talking about Cisco level vulnerabilities, we're at that like internet perimeter device thing, usually enterprise facing. Typically when we're talking about an attack with this as the entry vector, it's a pretty big deal. So this is a good piece of warning and advice to folks like, hey, go get this thing patched. Cisco's already done everything they need to do to tell you this. Here's who's affected and here's how to fix it. So please take those steps and actually get this thing fixed, because it is being actively exploited. And if you needed any more reason to patch it, just don't wait. Don't wait to be the next one on the list. Be the next one to patch, not the next one to get exploited.
Okay, I see another mouthful ahead, but we'll try a little bit harder this time. Cisco has confirmed that attackers are chaining this vulnerability with previously stolen or compromised administrator credentials, underscoring how privilege escalation plays a critical role in exploitation. Devices with SNMP enabled, including Meraki MS390 and Cisco Catalyst 9300 series switches, are considered vulnerable. The flaw affects all versions of iOS and iOS XE that include SNMP support prior to the patch releases. Cisco addressed the issue in iOS XE release 17.15.4a, which administrators are urged to deploy immediately. While no full workaround exists, Cisco has provided a mitigation. Configure SNMP used to exclude the affected object identifiers or OIDs. However, this may interfere with key network management tasks such as device discovery and hardware inventory. Cisco also advises limiting SNMP access to trusted users and auditing current SNMP configurations using show running config to confirm if the protocol is enabled. Until patches are applied, these mitigations can help reduce risk, but they are not substitute for full remediation. The incident again highlights the growing trend of credential chaining and protocol level exploits targeting core infrastructure services and enterprise networks. So yeah, a lot of Cisco switches out there. I'm sure you've heard about this if you've got them in your environment. But if you haven't and you have the switches, go take a look, do some patching, and
patch.
Yeah. All right. Next up, researchers at NCC Group have found that voice cloning technology has reached a level where just 5 minutes of recorded audio is enough to generate convincing voice clones in real time. Their work highlights how AI-powered impersonation can enhance social engineering attacks like phishing, where attackers use phone calls to extract sensitive information. Unlike earlier deepfake technologies that relied on pre-recorded clips or text-to-speech systems, this framework converts the speaker's live voice into another person's voice with minimal delay. This makes the interaction far more realistic and therefore much harder to detect. The team demonstrated that attackers with only average technical skills and resources could reproduce this setup. And what makes this concerning is how the barrier to entry is dropped. Instead of needing specialized hardware or massive amounts of training data, the researchers showed that a few hours of model training and publicly available voice samples were sufficient. During their controlled experiments, they successfully used the cloned voices to extract confidential data from real organizations. This raises questions about the security of relying on voice authentication and shows how even well-trained employees could be manipulated by an attacker using these tools. This makes me more worried about somebody calling my mom.
Yeah.
And asking for money because I'm in jail in some far off country.
Yeah, I also see this better being, and better is maybe the wrong word, but I also see this being used more in scams than I would anywhere else, I think, Chris. I mean, I understand what they're saying. NCC Group was talking about extracting sensitive data and stuff like that. I kind of get a little bit off-put by this one. It seems like a really weird thing to go and do with it. Like, oh, I wouldn't have normally done this thing, but it sounded like the CEO. Yeah. So I did a thing and whatnot. Where I see this maybe having more success, Chris, is when you have like non-native English speaking folks trying to launch phishing attacks, because they can now sound like a typical American. They can even do regional specific things. So they could go and grab, the voice of a regional person and then say, hey, this is so-and-so and whatnot. Believe it or not, and there's this odd catch up, which I think has to be done. And, it's interesting because when I read this article, one thing that came to mind is something that I see quite often. And I'm gonna introduce this. It's going to be a weird concept, but I'm going to bring it up anyways. Chris, I don't know if you've noticed, but like on YouTube or on Instagram and stuff, they have like those shorts that play where it's kind of like a quick, 30-second dissection of a movie or something. Well, what I've seen over the past couple of weeks, because I always have a flag on for this type of stuff, I always find it really interesting to watch and see from an AI perspective, is those kind of like trash faceless accounts that have like a 30-second debrief of a movie, but now those debriefs are actually done or narrated in the voice of the star of the movie, as weird as it sounds. And the one that I saw in particular that caught my interest was, it was a YouTube short, 30 seconds. It was a debrief of the movie Speed. You remember that movie?
Yeah, I do.
But
Keanu and Sandra Bullock, right?
It was done in Sandra Bullock's voice. And it was wild because I was like, there's no way she recorded this. It was like just a hair too quick, right? Yeah. And then as I kind of, scrolled right and then scrolled up, and that account had the exact same video, but narrated in Keanu Reeves's voice as well. So, and it was the exact same script. It was just the voices were different. And I found this to be like, wow, this is where we're seeing an explosion of realistic deepfake voices, is actually in like these faceless accounts / spam videos and things like that get generated. And that's where I think the proving ground for a lot of this stuff exists, Chris. And then I think the adversaries just pick out and choose what they want. Like, oh, wow, we were actually able to train this thing over in this account. It worked out really well. Now I'm going to pick that technology out and I'm going to make it sound like the CEO of a particular thing, or make it sound like an accounting person or something like that. You and I both have a ridiculous amount of public content that's out there. So I would be curious if anyone wanted enough time to actually like imitate our voices. They've got plenty of examples out there. But then my thought would be like, what would you do with that?
Well, I tell you, we could do text to voice, and I could get through that previous segment with all the SNMP.
Either that, or we could just record episodes just in mass, just like article, post. But we wouldn't do that. Just listeners, just so you know, we spend time making sure we do this in real person. But here's what I found interesting. Looking through the article, and it was a dark reading debrief of the NCC Group's investigation, but they brought up two examples here. In June, a financially motivated group in phone calls with Salesforce customer, prompting the latter to provide access to Salesforce environments. And then in May, a 3 a.m. ransomware group adopted the trend of combining email bombing with phishing to gain access to victim systems before deploying ransomware. In this case, it's always a +1. Mm-hmm. It is not it's not like the end-to-end account. The beginning and the end is all done with fake voicing. It's usually combined with something else or combined with some other objective, which is a great thing, Chris. I think it gives us an opportunity to insert additional breakpoints and human in the loop moments where we can actually like defend and stop against some of this activity. So my big thought and big idea here for everyone is look for areas where you might have a process that could be bypassed with a single voice command and something, and insert an additional breakpoint or an additional human in the loop moment in there.
Yeah, and I could see if a company was under attack and everybody was sort of in panic mode, at that moment, maybe getting a call from the CEO asking me to do something on the computer might seem reasonable. So next time you're in person, maybe come up with a secret phrase that you guys can use in situations like that. Because, on its own, I don't expect that, if our CEO called and asked me to go get some gift cards, I'd know something was wrong. But like if everything was on fire and they asked me to like log into a cloud console and do a thing, that might seem a little more reasonable. And I might act under those circumstances just because of the pressure and stuff.
That's unfortunately where I see adversaries finding success, is in situations of chaos. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think outside of scammers, to be honest with you, the industry, if you will, or the scammer focus that I see suffering the most is probably going to be like the romance scams and everything like that, which are going to be tough because now someone can actually sound like the, actor that they claim to be or whatever. The one that comes to mind, I read about this recently, was like, I think someone was claiming to be Matthew McConaughey, and he was like stuck in a hospital and had stolen like 50,000 euros out of someone over in the EU needing help to get out of jail. And in my mind, I'm kind of thinking like, who in their right mind would think that Matthew McConaughey would just randomly email them looking for money to get out? But it's like, now if you can accompany that with a deepfake phone call and be like, hey, I need help and everything, it's like, wow, that's really tricky. And then the other one is going to be, I think, as you mentioned too, is like, that like your son is in jail, needs bail money kind of scam. That's another one where it's like, help. And it's tough with the technologies getting to, the barrier to entry does get lower. But I find the biggest applicability or the biggest threat surface here really is going to be in scams, not necessarily in gaining access into enterprise environments where there likely are already additional authentication measures in place. Mm-hmm. But, Chris and I, you've said this before, just get everyone in the company YubiKeys and implement some sort of strong authentication. So that way, even if someone calls up and, implement a second factor or a second call, every time you see a Hollywood movie, you need 2 people to turn the keys and stuff like that. Implement breakpoints where someone needs to check in or there's a potential for verification and double checking, and then just make sure that person actually follows through with it.
Yeah. And who doesn't want to have secret passphrases like,
see what I'm saying?
The bunny is alert.
I actually like your idea, Chris, where it's kind of like, hey, we need you to do a thing. And it's like, what's the password? And if someone's like, I don't know the password.
There you go.
You're kind of like, what password? And you're like, I'm hanging up on you, you scammer. And then you hang up. And then, of course, AI comes along 2 months later and is like, how to automatically generate key passwords based on Chris's speech history. And then next thing you know, it's like AI guesses the right password. And you're like, oh, interesting. Or the way to do it, Chris, what the way to do it? Use your deepfake AI voice to pre-call the person and say, hey, if we ever have an emergency, the password is going to be podcast. And then a month down the road, when I wish you second round, I say, hey, the password is podcast. Here's what I need. You're already prepared for it. Maybe we just gave away the playbook for how to actually implement this attack.
I think we might have done that. And I think we're eventually going to be doomed. But for now, we're going to hold the line and fight back against
That's right.
the madness.
We fight for the users. Speaking of which, this week a brand new Tron comes out. Just saying.
Yeah, my boy's 5. I think he might be ready for that. All right. We're going to skip the end there and jump on to the next one. I think we gave that one enough time. A China-linked cyber espionage group tracked as UNC5221 has been systematically targeting network infrastructure appliances that lack standard endpoint detection and response or EDR support. According to Google's Threat Intelligence Group, or GTIG, the attackers are using a sophisticated backdoor dubbed Brickstorm to gain long-term stealthy access to organizations across sectors, including legal services, tech, SaaS providers, and business process outsourcing. What makes this campaign especially dangerous is the nature of the systems being compromised. Firewalls, VPNs, IDS, IPS, and virtualization management platforms like VMware, vCenter, and ESXi, which are commonly outside the scope of traditional EDR visibility. UNC5221's operational strategy emphasizes stealth. Brickstorm uses per-victim command and control infrastructure and mimics legitimate software to avoid detection. In several cases, attackers remained undetected for over a year, with an average dwell time of 393 days. Yeesh. Once inside, they targeted the email of developers, administrators, and other individuals of strategic interest, often via abuse of Microsoft's Entra ID enterprise applications with elevated permissions. GTIG emphasized that compromise of SaaS providers had downstream impacts, allowing access to their customers' environments as well. So, we cover a lot of stuff on the show, and this is the kind of stuff I think that gets my prickles up. I know that the target for this kind of threat actor is small, but very serious.
Yeah. This is one of those, like, okay, we got a brand new TTP thing that's going on out there. Like, this is one of those heavy hitters, you know what I mean? And this is an interesting one. So, China Nexus threat actor, as you mentioned earlier as well. Industries under fire here: legal services, SaaS providers, process outsourcers, technology. You went through some of the details, but there's a really great breakdown. I mean, hat tip to the Google Threat Intelligence Group, the Mandy and IR folks who have put together an amazing walkthrough, as always, as expected, of just how the adversary does what they do, including, Chris, and this one I was hugely excited to see, threat hunting guidance internet traffic insight, access to Windows, and the way that they do what they do, forensic findings. But then the other thing that gets brought up here is really just the wide scope of the capabilities of the threat actor, right? Accessing Windows machines using RDP sessions. Let's see, accessing, they went through and dug through Windows shell bags to identify how the adversary is accessing credentials and secrets, accessing M365 from an enterprise perspective, access of vCenter and ESXi accounts. I mean, just a really wide range of capabilities that the threat actor was employing here, number one. And then number two, I think also is just the guidance that gets provided in here. They do actually provide a scanner, and there we go. It's at the top here. Mandiant actually provided a scanner that folks could use to look for evidence of Brickstorm IOCs on a system to determine if you've been compromised. Love seeing that type of thing because it's an easy, actionable thing to get into. But what I wanted to spend just a moment on was the industries that have been hit here. And in case no one's picking up on the trend, going through all the technical details is great. And I covered at a very high level a skim through because I wanted to spend some time on this part, who's being targeted. And I like the graphical version better. Legal services, SaaS providers, business process outsourcers, and technology. This is the second time I've walked through that list. I'm driving it home because, Chris, this is a one-to-many attack relationship in here. These are folks who often have their own customers or their own clients, beneath them, if you will. So this is a one-to-many relationship of if I compromise one SaaS provider, I get access to their customer list or their client list. If I compromise one legal services, I get access to all of their clients and everyone who they maintain. Same with outsourcers and technology companies. And that's probably the scariest part about adversaries like this is they recognize and realize the benefit of going after an aggregate target as opposed to one by ones. And that's likely going to create a much wider victim spread for them. And just, a really interesting approach. Again, hat tip to the folks who put the article together, but I just want to draw everyone's focus as you're reading about groups like this and hearing about what they're doing. Take a look at the industries and the types of businesses that they're targeting, and then pick up on between the lines. Oh, wow, this allows them to scale their attack out much faster than folks might be used to because it's not an individual company with a single network. It is a potential vector into others. So the entry vector here ends up being kind of compromised accounts, trusted resources, trusted accounts, trusted capabilities. And then the adversary compromises those and, they compromise one. Next thing you know, they're in 10, 20, 30 different victims, all acting as if. And as, Mandiant mentioned in here, 393 days of dwell time, Chris, that's over a year. And all these things driving home. APT Nexus adversary, targeting one-to-many relationship industries, 393-day dwell time. This is a pretty big threat that's out there. And it's a pretty, capable threat actor. When we talk about advanced persistence, this is exactly what we're talking about. Persistent, or I should say, living in an environment for over a year, understanding who their targets are, how to reach the end state of success and act on their objectives. I mean, definitely something that should get a lot of focus and a lot of magnifying glasses. And I'm not spending time walking through the technical indicators here too much because I want to draw attention to how the adversary did what they did and, how they achieve their goals. And if you're in one of these industries and not aware of how this group can do what they do, just watch out because they're very capable and we're probably going to hear more about them in the coming months, Chris. That's going to be my guess here as we unveil more about these environments they've compromised, what their toolkits may look like, and hopefully we'll see some other groups offer some additional insight into this UNC 5221. Maybe some other blog posts, technical findings, and things like that. Yeah, last thing I'll mention here, and I've brought it up and we'll drop the link in the show notes too, is there is a link to a blog post dating all the way back to April 3rd of this year, where the adversary was compromising a critical Ivanti Connect secure vulnerability and using that to get in. We might have even covered
I was going to say, that rings a bell.
Yeah, we might have even covered this one back in the day. So here we are 6 months later, literally coming full circle on an adversary who's had long-term persistence and is associated with different vulnerabilities, targeting different industries. Folks, we're going to be talking about this one for a while.
Yeah. So the Brickstorm malware is written in Go, designed to be cross-platform and includes SOCs, proxy functionality for network pivoting and traffic obfuscation. A key evolution in recent samples is the inclusion of a delay timer, allowing the malware to lie dormant for months after initial infection. To further obscure its functionality, UNC5221 uses Garble, an open source Go obfuscation tool, along with custom libraries that continue to evolve. Communication with C2 infrastructure is routed through services like Cloudflare Workers or dynamic DNS providers such as slip.io or nip.io. Each compromised victim receives a unique C2 domain, making it extremely difficult for defenders to use shared indicators of compromise. Security vendors like Picus Security have observed additional tactics, including the use of in-memory Java servlet filter on vCenter, which can intercept authentication and extract credentials without leaving persistent traces. UNC5221 also appears to leverage virtualization management functions like VM cloning to exfiltrate sensitive data, such as credential stores. These behaviors are often masked using legitimate high-privilege credentials, making the activity resemble routine administrative operations. Experts warn that long-term stealth and choice of overlooked infrastructure, particularly edge devices, highlight significant monitoring blind spots in many enterprise environments. Security leaders are being urged to treat these systems as critical infrastructure. That includes maintaining real-time inventories, minimizing unnecessary internet exposure, forwarding logs into central SIEM systems, or SIM if you prefer, and implementing strict access controls. While perfect prevention may not be feasible, enhancing visibility across appliance layer and virtualization platforms could significantly reduce dwell time. Experts also stress the need to hold third-party vendors and partners accountable to the same security standards, especially when their infrastructure serves as a bridge into larger ecosystems. The Brickstorm campaign is a textbook case of how advanced persistent threats are shifting their focus from endpoint-centric attacks to infrastructure-level compromises that are harder to detect and easier to persist within. Yeah, and I got to say, in the last couple conferences I've been to, I've seen more edge security companies in the vendor lists on the show floor. So there is some attention being paid here. But like, if you think about how widespread our communication infrastructure is, how many old devices are out there, facing well-resourced advanced threats, they're going to find a spot to dig in. And in like this one, they found a really good spot, and they're in there well.
Yeah, you're right about that one. And unfortunately, this is something, as you mentioned, that everyone needs to be paying attention to. Widespread threat actor access and capabilities, a lot of TTP capabilities. And finally, the last thing I'll mention is, as Mandy points out here, IOC hunting is not going to work out. You need to have TTP based hunting where you're able to actually pick up on, combined activities, adversarial behavior, and kind of higher level aggregate steps, as opposed to, hashes and file names and IPs and stuff like that.
All right, last up, I found this one pretty interesting. Dutch authorities have arrested two 17-year-old boys suspected of being recruited by pro-Russian hackers to carry out surveillance activities. According to prosecutors, the teens are being investigated for their involvement in what is being described as government-sponsored interference. The recruitment reportedly took place over Telegram, a platform commonly used by cybercriminal groups and state-aligned actors for its privacy features and minimal moderation. The investigation is being handled by the Public Prosecution Service and Dutch intelligence services, highlighting the potential national security dimension of the case. Local media report that one of the teens was spotted walking near high-value targets, including the headquarters of Europol and Eurojust, as well as the Canadian Embassy, while carrying a Wi-Fi sniffer. These devices are typically used to scan, map, and potentially intercept wireless network traffic. The presence of such devices near sensitive infrastructure has raised concerns about reconnaissance activity, possibly in preparation for cyber attacks or other forms of intelligence gathering. Authorities did not disclose whether any data was captured or transmitted to third parties, but they are treating the activity as potentially being in the service of a foreign government. So, Leonard Koopman, if you're listening, we need to get some enzyme nodes to these folks out there. If people aren't familiar, Leonard Koopman runs a project called Enzyme, which is cyber physical attacks. So with his device, you can actually detect when people are doing stuff like this.
I'm going to say what Chris usually says, and I know he wanted to say in this situation, which is two 17-year-old kids getting caught here. Wouldn't it be great if we could have just channeled that knowledge or that skill into something else? I mean, seriously, like, Chris, you usually are the one who always mentions like the line between these two, the good side and the dark side, are so thin. Wouldn't it have been great if these kids had just focused on something legitimate? I mean, it would have been much better. I think it would have been much better to actually see some positive feedback from these kids here. But yeah, as you mentioned, like, this is a great use case for what Leonard is building with from an enzyme perspective. It's great to have it out there and identify situations like this. I'm afraid to say I think these two kids are just the ones who got caught.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't think this is the only time this type of stuff has happened. And unfortunately, probably happens multiple times. This is, like, I would say, state level espionage for sure, mapping out, Wi-Fi networks and intercepting data and stuff like that. I mean, we see this happen at security conferences and all over the place. It's just a shame to see a couple of really technically savvy teenagers here get caught doing this type of stuff. It's just not a good situation.
Yeah. So one of the teens has been released and is under home supervision, wearing an ankle monitor, while the other remains in custody. His arrest occurred while he was reportedly doing homework at home. Oh, man. Authorities executed a search warrant and confiscated various electronic devices during the operation. The father of the detained teen told reporters that his son has a part-time job, is an avid gamer, and has a known interest in hacking. While there's no confirmed evidence of successful data exfiltration or system compromise at this point, investigators are taking the case seriously given the targets involved. This incident appears to be part of a broader pattern where Russia-linked threat actors are leveraging young tech-savvy individuals in Western countries for low-level reconnaissance and disruption tasks. Similar cases have been documented in Germany and Ukraine, where teenagers were recruited via encrypted messaging platforms to conduct physical surveillance or minor acts of vandalism against government infrastructure. The approach reduces operational risk for the sponsoring actors while testing the effectiveness of hybrid espionage tactics in physical domains, blurring the lines between cyber and traditional intelligence gathering. It's interesting reading this last part. I kind of wonder if this is the kind of action that's behind the EU's big push for, like, backdoors into encrypted communication stuff, because they're seeing Russia leverage, use internally to go to this sort of thing for them.
Yeah, I mean, this one's tough. I mean, of course, Telegram's involved. We've talked about Telegram before being used in this case. I just don't like the fact, and this isn't going to change. I mean, this is happening all over the world, and it's been happening for decades, if not centuries, but kind of radicalizing, teens to join a cause or to do a thing. And unfortunately, we see it spill over into the hacking world very commonly, right? A hacker is not intentionally or necessarily a criminal directly. It's just what you choose to do with those skills. And in this case, I don't know if I would necessarily call this hacking. It's not a usual case of, like, breaking something apart and trying to figure out how it works and getting into the inside of it.
Yeah.
This is espionage. You're carrying a Wi-Fi sniffer around embassies, and that is, probably signposted all over the place, is downright internationally illegal. And it started out with an interest in tech and whatnot, and kind of turned into this. And of course, they're they're foreign teenagers being rallied by intelligence apparatuses of nation state groups. I mean, we've seen this done by terrorist groups. We see it done by all sorts of organizations, and it's not a good place to be in. Like, this one has much wider reaching effects, I think, than just, these two teens here, right? I think it's a weaponization of teenagers who, kind of like we learned from the mob movies, Chris, right? They don't deal with as much jail time and whatnot. So they're great for certain tasks because, hey, kid, I want you to walk into this embassy and do this thing, and you'll be a hacker. You'll gain some street cred and whatnot. And if they get caught, who cares? You didn't burn your actual spies. You just burned a radicalized volunteer. So not the best place to be in. And quite frankly, not a good story to read, because I think it has much wider global implications that we're probably just not seeing yet.
So how do we make the good side of things more interesting for young folks? How does it become more exciting than, doing some spy stuff for
yeah, that's a question I wish I had a better answer to. Maybe community outreach. Maybe we need to bring back some of those, like, school-based hacking groups where folks were encouraged with this type of skill sets to, like, don't be afraid to break a thing and bring it back to normal, or understand a code or something like that. If you've got teens who have these skill sets where they are technically savvy, and let me be clear, technically savvy today is not what technically savvy meant 10 years ago, 20 years ago, right? My 7-year-olds are technically savvy. I mean, that doesn't mean that they're hackers by any means. I think the bar has been raised. But when you have folks who are interested in that kind of hacker culture or hacker mentality, and I'm saying all this from a positive place, giving them an outlet in which to use those skills is a great way to be, and prevent them from getting into those radicalization groups, or, falling into those like dark corners of the internet where someone's like, hey, you can be legitimate by doing this thing or doing that thing. And instead giving them a positive output probably is one of the best ways to do it. It's much easier said than done, Chris, because the internet is so wide reaching these days. It's not like if you go start a local computer club, all the, nerdy folks kind of gather together like they used to. You can do all of this from your basement if you want to, for lack of a better stereotype. You can do all of this from a closed dark room, and it's a very thin line between being extremely interested in something and then being radicalized to do something for a foreign government. And unfortunately, making that line as thick as possible, or directing that output and curiosity into something else, is probably the best way to handle it.
Well, maybe we need to start a national hacking club.
Fingers crossed, man. An international one. I mean, maybe that's the answer. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, Matt, something to think about. Thanks again for coming out. We'll talk to you next week. I'm sure there'll be some more things to talk about.
Always a pleasure, sir. I will see you next week.
All right. Take care.
Thanks, Chris.
And that brings us to the end of another Intel Chat. You can support this show by sharing your favorite episodes with a friend, or subscribing and giving us a rating, or leaving a comment on your chosen podcast platform. If you want to be part of the conversation and access the intel we talk about in real time, you can join our community forum at community.limacharlie.io. Thanks for listening in, and we'll see you on the next one. The Cybersecurity Defenders podcast is hosted and produced by Christopher Luft. The show is co-produced and edited by Sam Blake, with graphics by Amr Al-Khatib. Sponsored by LimaCharlie, scalable infrastructure for your security services. Visit limacharlie.io to get started for free.